All right, let's just dive right in. We're about to go on a bit of a journey, tracing this secret history of an idea, a single thread that connects ancient mystics to, believe it or not, the absolute cutting edge of modern physics. It's a story that challenges our entire picture of reality, and it all starts with this truly wild thought from over 2,500 years ago.
I mean, just let that sink in for a second. This isn't just some pretty poetry. The ancient writers of the Upanishads were making a dead serious claim about the nature of the cosmos. They weren't saying that consciousness is just a little thing that pops up inside the universe. No, they were saying the exact opposite, that the entire universe, everything, is an experience happening within consciousness. To us, that sounds completely upside down, right?
But here's the big question. What if it's not upside down? What if modern science, after centuries of looking outward at stars and atoms, is finally circling all the way back to this exact same conclusion? That's really the heart of what we're exploring here. We're going to see if this ancient philosophical gut feeling is now showing up again, but this time in the language of math and physics.
To really get this, we need to follow two big ideas, two sort of golden threads that run through history. And the first one is a really powerful theme in all of science, this relentless, driving search for unity.
You know, the history of science is really just one big story of collapsing walls between ideas we thought were separate. For ages, we believed the rules up in the heavens were totally different from the rules down here on Earth. Then, boom, Newton comes along and shows it's all the same set of laws. We thought electricity and magnetism were two different things, until Maxwell proved they were just two sides of the same coin, electromagnetism. And the big one, of course, we saw space and time as this fixed, boring stage, until Einstein wove them together into one dynamic fabric, space-time.
And just look at how this process picked up speed. Each one of these breakthroughs built on the last one. And every single time, the universe was revealed to be simpler, more elegant, and way more interconnected than we ever dreamed. This wasn't just about finding new facts. It was about discovering the fundamental architecture of reality.
So here's the key takeaway from all that. Our first golden thread is this powerful drive in science to get rid of phony divisions. The universe, it turns out, is fundamentally one whole thing, not just a random collection of parts. Now hold on to that thought, because we need to pick up our second thread, and this one is a bit weirder.
Our second thread is a much stranger, more slippery idea. It's one that shows up not just in science, but in logic and even mysticism. It's the idea of recursion, or self-reference.
And this quote just hits the nail on the head. The ancient Taoists were essentially saying that the fundamental nature of reality, the Tao, can never be fully captured by any words or systems that exist inside of it. It's the ultimate paradox. The map can never be the territory. It's this profound, mystical warning about the limits of what we can even say.
And this idea of reality as a kind of self-reflection pops up all over the place. In Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah describes creation as these nested, self-similar layers unfolding from an infinite source. The Sufi mystic Ibn Arabi had this beautiful line, saying the world is simply God knowing himself in infinite mirrors. In all these different traditions, you get the same feeling. The cosmos is somehow a reflection of itself.
Okay, so this is all very beautiful and poetic, right? But is that all it is? Or could this ancient intuition about self-reference actually be baked into the hard rules of logic and mathematics?
Well, in the 20th century, we got the answer, and it was a massive yes. A logician named Kurt Gödel came along and mathematically proved what Lao Tzu had sensed thousands of years before. He showed that any consistent logical system, like arithmetic, is guaranteed to be incomplete. There will always be true statements that the system itself can't prove. Basically, Gödel proved that truth is always bigger than proof. The map can never fully contain the territory. It's a fact of logic.
Decades later, the thinker Douglas Hofstadter took this mind-bending idea of recursion and applied it directly to us. He suggested that our sense of I, our very consciousness, isn't some thing sitting in our brains. Instead, he called it a strange loop, a pattern of information that twists back around and is able to perceive itself. In this view, the self isn't a noun, it's a verb. It's the process of self-observation.
Okay, so let's recap. We have our two threads, the quest for unity from physics and the secret of recursion from logic and mysticism. Now we get to the really exciting part. This is where, in the middle of the 20th century, these two seemingly separate threads finally twist together.
The first big breakthrough came from Shannon. He took the fuzzy concept of information and turned it into something concrete, something you could actually measure, like energy or mass. He gave it a mathematical footing. This was absolutely revolutionary because it gave physicists a whole new language to describe reality. It wasn't just about matter and energy anymore. Now they could talk about information.
And at the same time, Norbert Wiener's new field of cybernetics showed that recursion wasn't just a philosopher's plaything. It was a real, functional tool. By building feedback loops where a system's output becomes its next input, you could create systems that could learn, adapt, and even regulate themselves. Suddenly, recursion was an engineering principle.
And then, quantum mechanics completely blew the doors off. Physicists like Niels Bohr realized that you couldn't describe a quantum experiment without including the person doing the observing. The act of looking was part of the system. John von Neumann went even deeper, showing that the fuzzy quantum world of possibilities seems to collapse into one single, concrete reality at the very moment of measurement. The observer wasn't just watching the show anymore. They were part of the cast.
So where does all this leave us? We've got physics turning into information theory. We've got logic and physics both pointing to this deep importance of recursion and the observer. So let's start putting these pieces together and see what kind of picture of consciousness begins to emerge.
When you lay it all out, a kind of logical ladder starts to form. Step 1, the fundamental stuff of physics can be described as information. Step 2, this information has structure. Step 3, as people like Gödel and the quantum pioneers showed, that structure seems to be deeply recursive or self-referential. And that leads to the final amazing step. What if that specific pattern of recursion, a loop of pure self-observation, is what we call consciousness?
Now, if you follow this chain of reasoning, it brings us to a huge fork in the road, with two major modern theories that are trying to explain what consciousness actually is based on this whole history. Okay, so the first option is called panpsychism. It suggests that consciousness is a fundamental property of the universe, like mass or charge. It's just everywhere and everything to some degree. But the second option, which seems to follow our logical chain more directly, is a model we can call ERM. It argues something subtly but crucially different. It says that information is the fundamental thing that's everywhere. Consciousness isn't a substance, it's a specific process that can happen to that information.
And that's the key distinction. ERM suggests that while the raw material of reality, information, is everywhere, consciousness itself is what happens when that information gets tangled up in a very specific way, a self-referential loop. To put it another way, consciousness isn't the ink, it's the story the ink writes about itself.
Which leaves us with a final, absolutely mind-bending question. If this whole secret history is pointing in the right direction, then your individual sense of self, that feeling of being you right now, might not be something separate from the rest of the cosmos. It might just be the process of the universe itself through an incredibly complex recursive loop, finally noticing its own existence.